esteemed academics, and ladies and gentlemen. It's with great honor that we welcome you to yet another enriching installment of the inaugural lecture series presented by the Faculty of Graduate Studies at the University of Moratuwa. As we gather here today, inaugural lecture, we continue to celebrate the tradition of knowledge, innovation, and throughout leadership in these dynamic academic fields. To officially commence today's proceedings, I now invite Professor Naren Pereira, the head of the Department of Architecture at the University of Moratuwa, to introduce our professor for the day, who will be Professor D.P.Chandrasekara from the Department of Architecture of the Faculty of Architecture.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am delighted to warmly welcome you to the inaugural professorial lecture by Professor D.P.Chandrasekara. If I may, Professor Chandrasekara is the current Deputy Vice Chancellor of the University of Moratuwa. An achievement we at the Department of Architecture is particularly proud of, especially being the first among us to rise to this prestigious position. Professor Chandrasekara has served the university over 35 years, 30 of which I have had the pleasure of knowing him. First, as the year coordinator of Level 1 when I enrolled, then as a colleague, the head of department, Dean of the Faculty of Architecture, and now the Deputy Vice Chancellor. Professor Chandrasekara is a chartered architect who earned his bachelor's and master's degrees in architecture here at the University of Moratuwa. His primary area of interest and research has been in architectural heritage and social aspects of architecture. This led him to postgraduate qualifications in applied sociology at the University of Colombo and in heritage management at the Institute of Housing Studies in Rotterdam. Professor Chandrasekara earned his PhD from the University of Colombo, where his thesis focused on social capital, inclusion, housing, and the plantation worker community. His contribution to heritage studies as an academic and a researcher, and also an author, has been invaluable in our community and asset to the university as well as the greater community. Prominent among his many publications are books such as Heritage Buildings of Sri Lanka, Architecture of Tampeta Viharas of Sri Lanka, Architectural Remains of the Inner City of Colombo, very recently. He is the incumbent Vice President of the National Trust. I take this opportunity to wish Professor Chandrasekara the very best in his future academic journey. I also take great pleasure in cordially inviting Professor Chandrasekara to profess his own thoughts at this August inaugural lecture at the University of Moratuwa. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Naren, for those kind words. I must also thank the present Dean of the Faculty of Graduate Studies for inviting me to deliver this lecture. I must also appreciate the encouragement given, this lecture series was started, if I remember correct, when Professor Ajit Alvis was the Dean Faculty of Graduate Studies. And when I was invited for this lecture, I had a discussion with Professor Ajit, and we agreed, or I thought I should present something in the inaugural lecture, something which I have not said before. Because if I say something which I have been already told, it might not be an inaugural. And as I think Professor Priya Andayas very correctly said, you should profess something new as a professor. So I'm trying to say something new which I have not said before. I would say it's, in that sense, it's very raw but probably I thought of saying something new about the architecture, which is my discipline, and about something happening right now in Colombo, the metropolitan city of the island. So the title I have put as Tale of Two Cities, though they are not really cities, but we call Port City as a city, the Colombo Fort and the Port City, which are joining each other geographically, and architecture and political economy. As a prelude, I must say I was very fortunate to be a student of University of Moratuwa 40 years before. And then I must remember the teachers who helped me to come into this position, especially Professor K.R.S. Piris, who was the Dean of the Faculty, late Professor K.R.S. Piris, late Professor Lakshman Alvis, late Professor Nimaldi Silva, who passed away about 2 months before. I understand Professor Lal Balasuri is there in the audience, who was my 6th year master. Then we were also very fortunate to have very good teachers, such as architect Chris Diseram, architect Vidurusri Naumani, architect Ranjit Alhakon. My 1st year master was Professor Shirani Balasuriya. And we had very many good teachers, probably that helped me, myself, as well as my colleagues to change make a huge transformation during the studentship as architecture students. So I would like to dedicate this to the teachers, past teachers who taught me at University of Moratuwa. The topic, as I explained, I will be talking about 2 geographical locations which are joining each other, Colombo Fort and the Port City, the physical developments, but not only the built environment, but basically the architecture and its relevance or the relationship with the political economy. Now, first, I would like to talk about architecture and political economy. Now, architecture is a contested term in many ways. It has been interpreted by many scholars in many ways, but what's probably most important for students is what, or as examiners, as teachers, what determines architecture. There are again different explanations, but what I accept, or what's generally accepted, is cultural and social factors play a very critical role in determining the architecture, irrespective whether it's grand, vernacular, or folk. There are other factors which modifies architecture. Probably this idea came early mid-60s by scholar Amos Rappaport, who made this explanation through the study of vernacular houses all over the world. House is a seminal work, House, Form and Culture, where he argues, irrespective of the materials, irrespective of the technology, irrespective of other factors, people tend to, as communities in vernacular tradition, tend to have house forms basically respond to culture. So even during winter and summer, when they shift from place to place, when the available materials differ, still their house forms, they maintain a certain pattern. So the cultural factors, the significance of cultural factors is highlighted by him in the early works, which I think was developed further during the latter periods. But technology, climate, other factors, cost, etc. plays an role, but as a modifier. Some of the later works on architecture and culture. Now, because political economy is a very significant social and cultural factor, very significant social and cultural factor, it's again has different definitions. it could be it's explained as economics and law, political science, how political institutions, political environment, and basically the capitalist system, economic system that we experience globally influence each other. Or it could also be explained as study of the relationship between political elections, political incentives, and economic policy. Or social science dealing with political policies, economic processes, interrelations, and their influences. So it's basically about the political institutions and the economic order. Now we go to the first geographical location, which is the Colombo Fort. If you look at the history, Colombo or Colombo was a small fort during the known history, that is 13th and 14th century period, initially used by the visiting traders, especially the traders from Arab, who were having a monopoly in the Indian Ocean at that time. Then we also know Portuguese, the first European power to land in the country, island, occupied. They came to Sri Lanka in 1505, but they occupied Colombo from 1517 and built a fort. At that time, Corte was one of the kingdoms. The Portuguese developed a fortification. In fact, the Portuguese fort was bigger than the Dutch fort, which was constructed later. It occupied the Colombo one, that is Colombo Fort, the present Colombo Fort, and the Peta. So it was bigger in the land extent. The Dutch, who fought with the Portuguese with the help of Rajasingha II, the Kandyan king, they were able to capture the maritime parts. So actually the Portuguese were here approximately 150 years. And then the Dutch were here again 150 years, and the British were here 150 years. So after 150 years approximately, the Dutch replaced Portuguese in the maritime regions, and they occupied Colombo. And they erected a very solid fort. But this is the Dutch fort, the Portuguese fort. You can see on the left the fort, and on the right the Peta. But the Dutch, it's only on the left side where the present Colombo Fort is, with different bastions. So it was a smaller fort. And in fact, the name fort to Colombo, the fort, this Colombo one, comes from the geographical area which the Dutch occupied as their fortification. Some old maps, Dutch period maps, which are now publicly available in the web, thanks to the National Archives of Hague. They have decided to give public access to all the archival material of their colonies. So this the maps and the archival material is now available online. Now these were some of the watercolor paintings of the Dutch fortification. We know Colombo is a marshy land, so now we see the Beira, but before that, most of the areas were marshy, and the ramparts. Now, this is an important picture, which was taken around late 1860s, before the destruction of the Colombo Fort by the British. So the destruction or the demolition of the Colombo Fort is an important milestone, because British occupied it for about 70 plus years. In 1870, they decided to dismantle it. Now this is a better drawing. You can see the bastions, ramparts, the different names given to the bastions, the harbor. Basically, there were few houses inside it, army barracks, the governor, the residence. This the Dutch period, a church. Because Dutch were, their main strategy was to construct fortifications along the coastline, and they were interested about trade. So they buy cinnamon, spices, store them in the warehouses and ship to Europe. They were not really into conquering the land except on 2 occasions. Portuguese had other ideas. So for them, the fortifications were very, very important. They had major forts in Colombo, Gaul, Jaffna, Trincomalee, Batticlo. Then they had small forts, several of them, Mana, Kalpitia, Nigambu, Kalutara, Matara, Tengol. Also had some few fortifications in the interior, especially at least 5 along the Callan River. That's the road leading to the kingdom of the indigenous kingdom at Kandy. This is a building constructed by the Dutch, still preserved, the Dutch hospital, because it was an important inside the fort. You will see this near the Bank of Ceylon Towers for the World Trade Center, now an upmarket shopping complex. These were drawings done during the Dutch period. Because when a ship comes, invariably there were a lot of sick people, and they were rushed to hospital. So it was within 500-meter distance from the harbor. And now you will see this as a leisure, restaurants, and lots of other activities conserved. It went through different phases. Police occupied it. Different organizations occupied it, but several renovations happened. But the most recent, about 15 years before, this was renovated. And this is the only building of the Dutch period found within Colombo Fort, though there are some other parts like ramparts, gates, etc. Outside the Colombo Fort in the Peta, you have the Wolfhandel Church and the Dutch Museum in the Prince Street. Then we come to British period. The British captured the Dutch occupied territory, not through war, because the Dutch had lost their war with the French in Europe, and as a consequence, the Dutch thought that they might lose their colonies also to the French, and they just handed over for the newly emerging power, the British, thinking that they will get it back after the problems are sorted out, which didn't happen. And the good thing that as a result, what happened was the Dutch built heritage was not destroyed during war, whereas the Portuguese built heritage was destroyed because it was a war between the Dutch and the Portuguese. So originally the British used all the Dutch infrastructure and facilities because they were not sure whether they will be occupying, they will be having their control over the island. But lots of things started to happen. In 1818, 3 years after the capture of Kandy, there was a major rebellion, Kandy rebellion, which was crushed. Then in 1830s, a very important economic reform started to happen in the form of Holbrooke-Cameron Commission, which abolished the compulsory duty system, the Rajakarya, where the people, indigenous people, had to do service to the king, the temples, the religious establishments, and plantation economy is started. And the road network, they introduced the road network, where the Dutch were thinking of fortifications, but British wanted to move their battalions quickly. So they didn't construct a lot of forts. South Indian labor came to plantations, and rail transport was introduced from 64 onwards, 1864. Colombo Harbour was developed, and the political power they started to consolidate. So we have the early period of British where they used the Dutch infrastructure. But in the middle period, especially in Colombo Fort, we see lots of new happenings. Basically, the demolition of Dutch fort and construction of new buildings. And the late period, especially after 1920, like we see the independence movement both in Sri Lanka and in India, and the British slowing down their activities in the colonies. So my basic understanding or the argument is that what you see today as Colombo Fort, the British fort, is a construction what happened between 1870 to 1920, which was the most significant period for the British in the island. Lots of economic developments happened, and their political power they were able to consolidate by that time, and the plantation economy was giving the returns. And what we see today, though we call it British buildings, they belong to the 50-year period, majority of them to 1870 to 1920. The demolition of the Dutch fort, though the records say it was due to sentry requirements or sanitation, better ventilation, because when you have high ramparts, you don't get the sea breeze. Maybe it's an excuse. Probably they wanted to open up land for the development, and they were sure that they will not need a fortification for the safety by that time. So one of the most significant decisions that they made was to dismantle or demolish or break the old Colombo fort. They didn't do the same to Gaul. Probably Gaul also would have had the same problems of sanitation, ventilation, etc. And as a result, now we have a World Heritage Site in Gaul, but not in Colombo. This period is most significant, and I will show some of the visuals and their construction period. Actually, I am borrowing heavily from the recent publication by architect Pali Vijayratna about the heritage of Colombo Fort, because the book identifies the different time periods of the buildings which were erected in Colombo Fort. Now, these are some old pictures. I think this is even prior to the introduction of motor vehicles to the country. Maybe 1880s. Because photography came, I think, in around 1880s. Yes. This is after the introduction of the motor vehicles. The Grand Oriental Hotel, GOH, in front of the Colombo Harbour, so that the people who disembark from the ships can just carry their bags and walk into the hotel. GOH. Colombo Lake House, this is 1920s, but again you can see the type of vehicles. But now we come to the color pictures. Now this is Dimel building, an important British period building. The architecture, the style, you can see the neoclassical Renaissance style buildings, the arches, the colonnaded veranda, or the arcade, the roof completely covered with the masonry balusters. 1870. So an early middle period British building. The General Post Office, 1895. in the Janadipati Mawata. Same style of the very strong British character, white, painted. Lloyd's Building, 1895. So all these buildings, most of these buildings you will see were constructed between the period 1870 to 1920, the 50-year period. The Cargill's Building, 1902, that was the first departmental store in the country. Fair face bricks, red color, lot of moldings, carvings, and a very long arcade. Australia House, 1900. Hong Kong and Shanghai Bank, 1918. This is a building which was constructed before 1870. The Home Guard Office now. So we have very few buildings. Market Marker Building, 1880. Lloyd's Building next to Market Marker Building, which I showed earlier also. Whiteway Building, 1907. So all these came up during the period of 1870 to 1920, 50-year period. Standard and Chartered Bank, 1880. The old Treasury Building, 1933. The Treasury and the Parliament, actually the old Parliament came first, and then the Treasury or the present Finance Ministry. But the discussion was started around 1910 to construct a secretariat and a building for the Legislative Assembly at that time, which was at that time it was in the present Foreign Ministry building, which was used as the Senate building also at one point of time. So this is also, though it is in 1933, the discussions, because it was a government building, it took long time. Public Works Department were the architects, and was constructed after the Parliament, old Parliament. 1906, Prince Building. Mackinnon and Mackenzie, 1860s, early building. This is Central Telegraph Office in the Lower Chatham Street, in front of the Transworks House, 1910. York Arcade, late 19th century. And the next building is the building next to it, the State Pharmaceutical Corporation now. Gafu Building, very dominating, a landmark when you're coming from the Peta side. York Building, early 20th century, or the first decade of 20th century. The Central Point Building, 1911. The Old Parliament, 1929, but it was started again from 1910 onwards. The discussions were there. A neoclassical building on the edge of Colombo Fort, facing the sea. The Transworks House, which provided accommodation for Public Works Department for a long period of time. Buildings Department, Highways Ministry, and all. Lower Chatham Street. General Post Office building which I showed. Now this is the Republican building or the old Legislative Assembly before the construction of the old Parliament. It also used as the Senate because we had the upper house, I think from about 1940s to 1972. Now the Foreign Ministry, again in 1860 building. Now Cargill's building and the new developments. Now you see these two as the most dominating, the World Trade Center, the Twin Towers and the Bank of Ceylon as the post 1977 buildings in Colombo Fort. When the country, the economic situation, which was changed to closed economy to an open economy in 1977, the new developments demanded new spaces, and as a result, we see these two completely contrasting structures coming up. You see here and there some small buildings, but these are the most dominant. Now you see two buildings which belongs to a different type in Colombo Fort. I would put them as pseudo-traditional or the Sri Lankan style, where they tried to introduce the Sri Lankanness into the buildings, which happened after 1920 when the independence movement made influences on the art and culture, architecture. So they wanted to abandon the British styles, but search a national identity. What they did was they went back to Anuradhapura, Polonnaruwa and Kandy and borrowed elements and incorporated them into the new structures. So this was D.R. Vijayawardena, a nationalist who wanted to construct a building for his new publishing house, Lake House. And you can see the Kandian period pekaders, Kandian period columns, Anuradhapura period decorations, Polonnaruwa period moldings in the Lake House building, but constructed with different materials. The second building of this type is the YMBA building, Young Men's Buddhist Association building, which has a double pitch roof, which was used only for sacred buildings in the traditional architecture, but here we have this for a secular building. The octagonal structure, something influenced by the Patripua in Kandy, and also a shrine room. So these two buildings, I would like to put them as pseudo-traditional or not real traditional, but trying to search traditional roots in Colombo Fort. Inside the fort, you get these two structures. Actually, the Lake House is on the boundary, on the edge, because on the other side you have the lake, Beira Lake, and that's the edge of Colombo Fort. Interestingly, Colombo Fort railway station is not in Colombo Fort. It is in Peta, Colombo 10. It's just outside the fort. So basically what we call Colombo Fort is that fort, the area. So in studying the architecture, what we see is majority of the significant buildings, what we see at Colombo Fort are 1870-1920 period buildings. The demolition of the Dutch fort opened up new land, areas for development, or whether they demolished the Dutch fort to open up new lands. So though they say that it's recorded that Dutch fort was, as I explained earlier, demolished because due to lack of fresh air, that's the term that they used. Probably, I would think they wanted new land for the new developments and removed the fortifications, and the ramparts occupied large chunk of land, prime land. And it is not only the commercial establishments. So this is very important. It is also the political power that was concentrated in Colombo Fort. If you ask somebody who worked in Colombo Fort, government officers in 1970s will tell you majority of the government officers or the important ones were located in the fort. like the Parliament, Finance Ministry, Treasury, Public Works Department, the banks, the Senate House, the other ministries, Postal Office. So it was also not the private sector, but also the government departments, ministries, establishments, and also the political, the buildings housing the political authority like the Legislative Assembly, the Parliament, the President's House, the present, which was the Governor's House, and also new commercial facilities, the financial establishments, banks. So it was the administrative and the commercial hub of the island. What's important during this period is the political power was more significant, had a clout over the economy or the trade. The British, especially in 1817 to 1920, the governor and the limited secretaries, number of secretaries had absolute power over all the activities happening in the island. You get some British civil servants coming here. Sometimes they are military people, retired or military people who had worked in the military earlier, and they had absolute power to decide, make decisions. So if you look at the architectural characteristics, they were neoclassical or Renaissance, which started to happen after the Industrial Revolution in Europe. Very dominant walls. They were decorated white or red color, unplastered. Roof not visible like in the Dutch or traditional Sri Lankan architecture. Solid void ratios. You will see you don't see glass facade, you see punches of windows, and very dominating buildings in Colombo Fort. Now we come to the next land, the port city. The name given is city itself, port city, which is about 270 hectares. Out of it, about 1/3 will go for public activities, which is a significant amount because you don't have that amount of public land in old fort. Because if you take out the gold face, which is outside the fort, so you have about 1/3 of it for public, but 178 or 2/3 for development. We don't see very many pictures or the proposals of the proposed developments. I have borrowed some from the developer's site as well as from some local architects. But the background is, sorry, the spelling is here. It should be background. Global economic order, open and neoliberal. Political power, democratic, less state controls. Metropolitan has become a strong center. This is the picture where you can see zoning of activities, recreational activities in the master plan. Guidelines for the development. An aerial picture. Some of the visuals done by urban designers, architects of this city by during different stages. You will see the southern side low rise or middle rise, and the northern side high rise. So the view of the city to the southern side will be there for the high rise buildings as well. And the architecture is completely different to that of Colombo Fort. Dense high rise might have more greenery. And the facades will have a lot of glass. And the walls, I don't think will be visible. And some forms might emerge in the land. And it tries to respond to the water body, which we don't see in the old Colombo fort. Now, these were pictures from Skidmore, Owings and Merrill, who won a competition, urban design competition. And these are from their submission, not from the developer, but I think the developer conducted this architectural urban design competition. I think their idea is to have more greenery, but also high rises, glass facades. Very, what shall I say, different, unique build forms, facades. Now, these I borrowed from a local DG5, who are proposing a financial center, maybe with a foreign partner. Their website presents this. They have also a low-rise villa complex proposed for the port city. This is the finance center which they have proposed. Now we come to the important part. Try to compare the two situations, how the political economy of the two places gave rise to the architecture or the developments. The first is, if you take the time, it is 1870 to 1920, what you see as Colombo Fort today predominantly, except the Twin Towers and the Bank of Ceylon and the Lake House, the YMBA buildings and some other small buildings. It's predominantly what you see, the developments are 1870 to 1920. Compared to that, this is about 100 years after first half of 21st century. And the Colombo Fort, if you look at the political situation, the British, they have consolidated the political power at that time of the island, and the central government having a monopoly control over trade and economy. So that was important. The central government, even the allocation of plantation land was done by the few people in Colombo to the Britishers. Whereas now we have more global influences coming from different parts. Trade and commerce overriding the political authority of the country in many ways. So the trade and economic sectors are more powerful, in fact, than the political institutions. And in architecture, we see unity and compatibility, a significant character in the architecture of Colombo Fort. The buildings complement each other. They try to follow similar language, similar pattern. Whereas Colombo Fort, instead we see variety and also a competition, maybe the height, the designs, the materials, the forms. So it is probably the most significant characteristic as a whole, what you see in Colombo Port City. When you compare the compatibility at Colombo Fort is not there you will not get it in a new city, and it might look like a East Asian or South Asian metropolis like Singapore, Hong Kong, Jakarta, Manila in time to come. And we see glimpses of that in places like the Twin Towers World Trade Center, the Shangri-La Hotel, which occupies very small plots, very compact, but the materials, high rise, use of glass, etc., are very evident. Whereas the Colombo Fort, the old British fort, had very formal, dominating and disciplined built environment, whereas the new port city developments would be informal and also playful. I am not using the term playful in the way that postmodernist architect used it, because postmodernism, I think they try to say after modern architecture in 1980s, a new development came as postmodernism in many art fields. Architecture was probably one of the fields which embraced postmodernism, and we had some architects like Michael Graves, which the present king of UK, Wilhelm, opposed at that time with then president of RIBA, Rod Hackney. He was against the modernism, as well as probably when the postmodernism came, he was a very strong critique of that. But some of them might look, I think postmodernism didn't last, so I'm not going to say they are postmodernists, but you will have this playful character in the built environment in the port city. And you saw some of the drawings had this recreational, this character. And the state sector buildings, they were designed by the state sector architects, public works department at that time, and built by local builders. There were 4 or 5 builders. Workers was one, but then there were some private parties going by their names in the construction of Colombo Fort. But now we will see private sector investments, international designs, and construction by international contractors coming up in a place like Port City. And as a consequence, you might not have one type or one style. Probably one can call it a good salad of all the styles and all the construction, which I think you will see in some of the newly developed metropolitan cities, not in Europe, not in the continent, but in Southeast Asia especially. The British architecture was sensitive to local climate to a certain degree. The windows were recessed, and you had this nice arcade spaces which were multiple use. Even a beggar or a newspaper seller can do their activities. The payment hawker, and the hot heat didn't come because the walls were very thick and the big chunk of the facade was solid. But in the new buildings, you will see more dependency on technology, air conditioning, or new glass materials, etc. So the buildings will have, I think, orientation will not become an important factor. For them, the more important thing should be the visual connections to the water body, and you might start to see different type of architecture coming up as a consequence. Then the functionality was very important for the British period buildings, and the functional considerations were given priority. Whereas in the new port city, you might get a lot of expressionist buildings, and the character or the outlook or the expression, and probably use of glass, even the interiors we see same. So expression will become more important at the end of the day, because they project an image of the organization that they are housing, maybe international trade organizations, commercial organizations. So they want to say that their presence among the others. Then also we see even today, Colombo Fort is less gentrified. Now gentrification is, I would explain it as use of or allocation of space, use of space by certain group of people, especially the rich and the elites, not by force, but due to the design of itself. Now, for example, I would say arcade to certain extent is gentrified. But Colombo Fort, compared to that, I would say, is not gentrified. All segments of the people will be there, the way that it has been. Even not only the plan, town plan or the urban design, but also the buildings. They give some space to people. You can just sit on the arcade. Nobody will chase you out. Or a payment hawker can occupy that space. In 70s, this was very, very popular. So that's, I would say, Colombo Fort. And also the activities. We had a lot of government officers. So middle-level white-collar workers used to be there. And you see eateries catering to them in Colombo Fort. Whereas Fort City, though it will be open and it will have a lot of public space, we cannot predict now, but my understanding is it will become a gentrified space. Tourists and certain segments of people will start to use them by activity and by the architecture. So we can very clearly see the situation, the clear distinction between the developments, not only the style, but also the expressions, the way that the developments will happen. And they very clearly represent, that's what I would like to say, the political economy of the British period, the Middle British period. It reflects the architecture of the Colombo Fort, the British period buildings, Middle British period buildings. And the port city will be a reflection or a mirror of the new political economy, less the political power, but more the economic power of the global situation, maybe the liberal economy, the new neoliberal power, and new trade and commerce. All these will play a very key role in the development of the architecture in the new port city, which we might see I don't think it will take 50 years like the fort. I think within 20 to 30 years, we might see a full development in the new port city, which might also affect, I think. I'm not going to say this is good or this is bad. I just want to see the relationship between the political economy and the architecture of these two entities. So I will finish there. That's all. But I would like to thank some of the friends who contributed to this. Professor Kapila Dharmasetti Silva from Kansas University helped me to shape these ideas. Dr. Milinda Patiraja, architect Warner Silva, especially from the University of Moratuwa. I had some discussions and their contribution I value. So I would like to thank FES, the Dean of the Faculty, Professor Gopura, and the rest other staff for giving this opportunity. Thank you very much.
Our heartfelt gratitude to Professor D.P.Chandrasekara for his insightful and compelling lecture. Your expertise and thought-provoking perspectives have undoubtedly broadened our understanding on this topic. As a token of appreciation to Professor D.P.Chandrasekara and his valuable contribution to this inaugural lecture series, I now invite Professor Mrs. Yasangika Sandanayaka to present the lecture memento to our distinguished professor for the day. Additionally, I'd also like to invite Professor D.P.Chandrasekara to accept the lecture memento. Thank you, Professor Mrs. Yasangika Sandanayaka and Dr. D.P.Chandrasekara. As we conclude, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge and extend our appreciation to the esteemed sponsors for this 37th inaugural lecture. Cargill's Private Limited, our event sponsor, Daily FT, our print media sponsor, and the Sri Lankan Scientist, our social media sponsor. With that, we officially bring today's 37th inaugural lecture to a close. Thank you all for being a part of this engaging and enlightening gathering. We look forward to welcoming you to another iteration of this esteemed lecture series. Wishing you all a wonderful day ahead. Thank you.